talk about conferencing, and since it's well attended, the meeting won't take very long, but you can watch it online. So the first thing I was going to talk about is sort of my failure at doing conferencing my first 3 years here, or at least 2.5 years here as an instructor, and realizing that it was mainly that I was getting students to come to my office and they were sitting down, sliding their paper to me, and I was reading it while they sat there quietly, and then I would circle things, and then we might have a brief conversation, and it would leave. And I realized it was entirely instructor-led. And so I started thinking about why I wasn't enjoying that, why they weren't enjoying that, why they weren't becoming more independent as writers. And I started thinking about my personal experience with conferencing and seeing that it was entirely instructor-led, and so how do I stop that? So I decided I wanted to change it to become more student-led and make them more independent as writers, and so we ended up developing a sort of a guide for students for Fast Track, which I can show you too. And what this does is really talk to students about what a conference is, which tells them it's not about me sitting there reading your draft and circling things and then telling you what you did right and wrong, but it's more about you taking the initiative of bringing your draft and then explaining to me what is working well in that paper and why, and then what is not working well and what you feel like is weak and why, and then your student is to take notes and then tell me what you're going to do next, and that becomes much more of a student that takes responsibility for their writing and takes responsibility for where they're going with that writing, as opposed to me just saying, I want you to do this. I think that helps students learn to adapt and to write, not only for my class, but for any writing class or any class where writing is needed, or to just write for themselves. And so we developed this sort of sheet to kind of help them know what to expect and what to bring and what they will be doing. And so to learn more about that, I kind of read about some of the scholarship on that. My favorite was Don Murray's sort of idea of this other self, which is an internal editor. And this internal editor is something students don't tend to know about. And so it's that voice in your head that says, change this, move this, this isn't working, this is working, so on and so forth. And so his assertion is that we need to do conferencing often, and it needs to be short and quick, and it's all about asking questions of your students and having them answer. And the more that you do that, you kind of let them on to that other self. And once you start saying, why did you do this? And once they can start explaining to it, they start to recognize the decisions they're making, and they start to get to know that other self. And once they find it, he says, they get to know it. And once they get to know it, they learn to work with it. Once they've done that, then you leave and let them learn to do that. And so in order to do that, so what I do is, conferences I'm doing now is sort of an analysis of church signs. So I brought 3 different ones that we were looking at in class that you all can just sort of take a look at. And what they're doing is I take a look at the sign, they bring it to my office, and they're writing a paper, an analysis of this. And the main goal of the assignment is for them to decide, does it agree or disagree with the church's mission statement? And so part of the research is to find the website of the church. And so in order to do that, when they come to my office, I ask them every question possible. What are you researching here? What is the church's mission statement? Is it violating? Why or why not? And to give me those sort of clues as to why it is or why not. Explain it to me. And it's really hard for them to do that, especially because I ask them to do it in third person in paper and leave themselves out, non-affiliated with that sort of thing. And so as we sit there, I sit with the sheet of paper between us and we talk about it. And so one of my favorites is when we looked at in class the other day. It says Obama, Osama. Are they brothers? This is on a church sign. And so we'll start to talk, and I'll let them get a chance to analyze it, tell me what's going on and why and what's it saying and to whom, and do you think it would be violating a church's mission statement even though they hadn't found it. And so we'll do that, and then we'll talk about the there are 2 illogical assumptions in that sign. There's sort of the Aristotle syllogism of, Osama is Muslim, so Muslims are terrorists. And so Obama is Muslim, therefore he must be a terrorist. And so we talk about how there are 2 major issues there. And they do that through me questioning them and figuring it out, as opposed to me just telling them. And I think that in conferences, that's sort of the idea, is to let them bring what they have and questions they have, and you try to help coach them through questions to come up with the answer themselves, as opposed to me just telling them the answer. because if I tell them the answer, then they're dependent on me to keep coming to me with questions. But I want them to learn to know what good writing looks like in their writing, what bad writing looks like, so that they can learn to change that on their own without me being there. And it becomes more student-led as opposed to instructor-led. And when that happens, as I've been trying to do towards the end of last spring semester and then this semester I'm doing it, I find that students enjoy the conferences more and that I enjoy them more. And I find that they tend to learn more from it and do better work because I think they feel charged when they leave. Like I came up with this sort of information and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's mainly what I want to talk about. And I was hoping that all the participants could tell us about their different methods. Because I do think there are some issues with just having it completely student-led. There are times, I think, when an instructor does have to answer questions. When someone is not understanding fundamentally, no matter how much I might probe them or stick them in my office to come up with the answer. And so I was hoping some people could tell me different ways that they do it. So I don't know if one of you want to volunteer to tell me if you conference how you do it differently.
We do it in the same office a lot of the time, so that's another issue there. But just briefly talking about the way that you sit when you conference with a student, because this is something that I had to learn. It's really intimidating for a student if you're sitting behind a desk and they're sitting on the other side of the desk, and it establishes this sort of authority relationship where you are going to pass judgment and they fear the judgment that you will pass. And so we have actually turned the desks in our office so that they face the wall, so it's not an option for a student to sit on the other side of the desk. And what happens instead is we'll pull up a chair beside the desk so that we're sitting sort of catty-corner to each other and the paper is sitting there, and then it becomes much more about the material and our discussion of the material. Keith also has a slinky on his desk because students tend to get nervous at conferences. It's an intimidating environment, and giving them something that they can just sort of play with their hands is sometimes enough of a distraction to calm them down a little bit. So that's another good way to diffuse the tension.
And as teachers of writing, you're very lucky because we tend to have 23 or less students in a section as opposed to some of these people that teach 200 to 300 students in a section. But you don't really get to spend any one-on-one time with them, and they're not used to that either. They're not really used to you knowing their name when they show up, and so it is right to find a way to keep them calm and to make it more. I know Don Murray kind of phrases it as, think of it as a apprentice at a workbench. And the master woodsman is there to kind of answer the questions and to sort of say, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so that way you can offer general advice, but also through the probing of asking them, okay, well, how would you do this differently and why? And that sort of thing. Or if I don't like this part, well, why don't you like that part? And tell me why, and that sort of thing.